in a curriculum context, principles are beliefs about how practice should be conducted. The requirement of schools in respect to the principles is stated on page 44 of the document, and it says that the school's curriculum will be underpinned by and consistent with the principles in the national curriculum. We need to ask ourselves what this actually means in practice. Some schools interpret it to mean, well, we need to have programs that cover different aspects of the principles. For example, we've got a kapa haka group, so that might be addressing the treaty principle or a taha Māori program. But when you think about it, there might only be a small group of students relative to the total school population who are actually doing the Te Reo Māori program or who are engaged in the kapa haka group. Now that's not what is really intended by this principle. The principle is not so much a set of programs, but how teaching and learning is conducted in the life of the school. Professor Clive McGee of Waikato University was given the job initially of drafting up a set of principles for the curriculum. And if you speak to Clive now, he will say to you, the principles in that document look nothing like the ones that I initially proposed. So what he's saying in effect is that we've had a committee effect brought to bear on the composition or the statement of these principles. I've often found that when the principles are looked at by teachers, that they don't easily make sense to them in terms of what it might mean for their practice. Now, there's an implication there. If teachers don't understand what something means for practice, we have to clarify it to the point that it does have meaning for them. Now, consistent with the general directions of this revised curriculum, the school has permission to take ownership of the curriculum, and that ownership involves, amongst other things, stating intentions in a manner that makes meaning for the school and yet is consistent with the general intent of the national curriculum. Now this thinking applies to the principles. If the principles don't make ready sense to teachers, then we've got a task, and the task is to think them through and to state them in such a way that they will make sense, so they have got meaning for their practice, so they have got a basis, in fact the school has got a basis for reviewing its practice in terms of the general curriculum intentions. I've worked with some schools on this particular exercise, and what we've done is ask groups of teachers to look at each principle and say, well, what does that mean in our school in terms of what we as teachers need to be doing? And if we are doing these sorts of things, then we can be confident that we are actually following the intent of the national curriculum. We have an example provided on one of these slides given for coherence. As a result of one of these group discussions by a team of teachers, they chose to state in their school's curriculum documentation that coherence for their school means learning being experienced in ways that interrelate the values, the key competencies, and the learning areas. Now compare that with the way it is stated in the national curriculum. We are following the general intent of the national curriculum, but we're also stating in a way that now has easier meaning for teachers for their practice. It provides a basis for teachers and the school to regularly review the extent to which it is actually upholding those principles. Some schools say, well, are we going to be reviewed against these principles? Well, I would argue that if the Education Review Office, when it begins to review in relation to the school curriculum, the revised curriculum, that part of their role will be to say, okay, your obligation is to have a curriculum that's underpinned and consistent with the principles. How is this demonstrated in your school? The last thing that I would be encouraging or promoting is more documentation. My response to that sort of question would be, well, you need to come and have a look at our practice. Our practice is our evidence. Now, you can only have confidence in that evidence of your practice if you are from time to time talking about, discussing and reviewing how, for example, the principles are working in practice in your school. What are we really confident about? What areas are we not so clear about? Which areas would we like to focus on for improvement?